You know, some
It was a good conversation before any car. It was a good conversation.
I mean, some of them.
We haven't looked at the letter, he's not on Birchmont Ct. I know, it's.
Sign up early.
All right, welcome, everybody. It's about 3:00. So we'll try to get started. We're going to try to go through and have you guys have a chance to answer some questions. First, we're going to do a brief overview. And our administrator will give a synopsis of kind of where we're at, where we've came from, where we're at, where we're pulling you together now. If you haven't had a chance to sign in, please do sign in. After the presentations, we'll have a chance for questions. I'm going to try to do it where everybody who has a chance to ask a question asks, and then if people have seconds, that will come back. But I want to give everybody a chance first before we go to the people to ask a second question back around again. So, anyways, I'll let Chris get started.
Yes. So probably met a few of you before. I'm Chris Lane, the administrator. I used to be on the board a few years back, so you've probably seen my face before. I'm just going to give as quickly as I can an overview of the project. Again, a lot of you probably already somewhat familiar with it, but it'd be good just get the general overview, the history, and then we'll pass it over to Mark Fuller, our engineer, next, and he can go over some of the technical details of the project. And that really is one of the main reasons why we wanted to call you all here today. You guys live on a dead end road. It's not as long as say like a Lavinia one, but there's still going to be special considerations come construction time should this come to pass, which we hope it does. And we wanted to make sure that we got you all in the room and have a chance to ask questions and give you whatever answers we can today. So that said, I'll start with the overview of history. And actually, before I get into that too, just wanted to point out here, back last year sometime, we had come across this community aggregate website. It's called Niche, and they were ranking cities in Minnesota. And we noticed that Northern Township was on this top 20 list, whatever it was at the time, can't remember exactly. Thought that was really cool. Obviously, you're seeing a lot of cities up on there that are down in the suburban area. And then there's Northern Township. So, you know, we took notes, obviously. We think it's a great place to live, but other people obviously are taking note of it as well. Then looking at that website not too long ago here, we also noticed that this year they put out new information. And sure enough, Northern Township is, what do they call it? The #1 best place to buy a house in Minnesota. So just to kind of frame some of what we're talking about here today, we think Northern's a great place to live. Obviously, you guys live here. Hopefully you think the same thing too. When we're trying to do a project like this is something that we're hopefully is going to make that continue to be the case. We want it to be one of the best places to live in Minnesota for, you know, as far in the future as we can make it. And we think this project's going to help. So also just throwing this in here to get a little perspective, as the township stands, we're pretty big when you think of just different townships around the state and even just locally here. Obviously Bemidji, you know, 14,000 per population. Due to annexation, that number you see up there, 4,600, has come down a little bit, but every year we're seeing growth, new houses, whatnot. So I think we sit at about 3,800 now. That number is only going to continue to rise in the future. We're not a small community. Doing something of this kind of scope and nature is entirely in line with the population that we have and the natural resources that we have. So background to this project in specific, over the last couple of 2 years, we've had several meetings on this. And at many of the meetings, we've had people come up to us and just let us know that they used to be part of efforts to do exactly what we're trying to do right now. We had one gentleman stand up at one of our meetings who said he was on the board back in the 60s. And he knows of at least until back then when they've been trying to do exactly this, you know, sewer the entire Lake Bemidji. So we got a 50+ year regional goal that we're on the cusp of realizing here. Back 2 years ago is when things really started to pick up pace. Rutgers was having the septic issues. I'm sure many people, especially in your area, are well aware of being right next to them. And then we also had heard about County Road 20, the county wanting to redo that road. And it became a push from the local leaders here to find out a way that we could potentially get them hooked up to the sewer and even extend that to portions of the lake. Because again, this has been a goal for many, many years. Having the County Road 20 project going on where they're going to rip up the road anyways, if there was any way we could run those projects in conjunction, we wanted to find a way to do so. We've estimated that doing so will save our project well over $1 million. So it isn't just, you know, pennies that we're trying to save here. It's a substantial chunk of change. Also a little just perspective here. This map gives you a sense of the age of the septic systems around the lake. So obviously we talked a little bit about Rutgers. Well, in addition to them, we also have the DNR headquarters on the north end of Lake Bemidji, and then also the state park itself. They both have end of life systems, so they were looking for some kind of a solution here in the near term anyways. They caught wind about this, and of course, we're both very excited about the prospect of hooking up to a municipal system. But then if you just take a look at the color shading here, we don't need to get, too to the detail, but anything that you see in red there, this is back from 2020, in fact. Those are septic systems that are over 25 years old. So it's well over half of the systems, just by looking at the age that are way up there, getting towards end of life or already are end of life. So having some kind of a solution like this of a municipal type for all of these parcels is something that many people are going to be happy about. Of course, somebody has a newer system, we completely get and understand, wouldn't be as happy, but there is a large chunk of people that I've talked to personally too. When they hear about this project, they get extremely excited, just because it's time for them to do something on their property as it is. I'm going to go over some of the other benefits here towards the end. There's a lot of land use considerations that living on the lake, I think anybody who has any kind of planning project coming up, you'll probably want to hear it because it's a lot of good news there as well. So some of the initial planning efforts then, once we identified the possibility of doing this project, we were working with the city of Bemidji to try to find some way to hook them up, hook Rutgers and whatever parcels we could from this project up to their system. And for quite a while there, it looked like we had some sort of an agreement with them where we could hook up as a paying customer. A lot of you probably remember, I think it was fall of 21, we had a resident meeting because at first the city said that they would, let us hook up, but it would only be through annexing any of the properties that wanted to hook up. So we had a big meeting out at the fairgrounds, and all of the residents that showed up there, 200-300 people, whatever it was, were pretty much unanimously opposed to any form of annexation. Nobody seemed opposed to wastewater, just in theory and concept, but they didn't want to have any part of that if it was at the expense of annexation. So that's when we went back to the city, just let them know how our residents feel. And we came up with this potential for a while, it sounded like, where we could hook up as a paying customer. And then we went and sought out funding because the stipulation there was that we would have to put in our own system, as in the pipes in the ground. Once they were there, they would let us hook up. So we were able to get out and find $6 million through 2 different years worth of federal grants. We were extremely excited about that. That's the most money that has ever existed for a project of this nature up in our area. We went back to the city and said, hey, we have money in hand. What can we do? And at that point is when they rescinded their offer. So having that $6 million, we weren't just going to let it go to waste. We wanted to find some kind of a solution. At first, the next thing that we were looking at was an open air pond type system. There really was only one spot that made any sense to put it, just close enough to the lake to make it a viable project. And that was the state trust land parcel over on the east side of the lake. But the DNR manages that. Unfortunately, we just weren't able to find any path forward to secure that land. They said it would be decades before they were ready to do anything with it. So we started looking at all their options. And the other one really that made any sense at all was a mechanical type plant. And we'll, let Mark go into a little bit more of the details of what all that means. But the good news right off the bat, I guess, with the mechanical plant, from my standpoint at least, the open air pond system I was mentioning, that's like a pretty big footprint. It would take up whatever acreage on an 80-acre part of land. Plus it's open air. So there are some considerations with smell and whatnot at certain times of the year. You're switching over to a mechanical plant type setup. It's going to be a much smaller footprint. The building itself is not too different than maybe what you see down in the city now. It easily fit just the building, like on an acre. We'll probably end up with 10 to 12 acres worth of land just for drain fields and whatnot and backups for drain field. But the footprint itself is substantially less compared to an open air system. The county's been a wonderful partner throughout this entire process. And when we switch over to this mechanical plant option, they had a parcel in mind that would work out perfect. I'll show you here on the map as well. Over here on the east side of Lake Bemidji, that purple box, that is the county land. They have 80 acres there actually as well. The yellow dot is the opposite location where the plant itself could go. But they've been more than willing to figure out some way to sell that land to us so that we can put the plants there. Some interesting considerations just from this standpoint too. I already mentioned that first we were talking about maybe hooking up to the cities. And that's why hooking up over here made sense to kind of have this be like our phase one. But as soon as we started putting a plant over here, now all of a sudden you're already like more than halfway around the entire lake of the township's lakefront, right? So then we immediately just went back to the drawing board. It's like, well, why can't we just do everything? And so this is where we sit today. So we have phase one. starting over on this side, going all the way over to where the mechanical plant would be. It's essentially ending at the Lavinia boat access. And then what we're calling phase two would be everything shaded in blue there from that point to the southern edge of the township border. Worth pointing out, we're talking about protecting 100% of the Northern Township shoreline. And just that for a percentage of the lake itself is about 41% of Lake Bemidji. Most of Lake Bemidji down in this area is already sewered. So again, just to keep in mind, I mean, we're getting really close to the entire lake being sewered at this point. There's really just a small portion down here that wouldn't have sewering. So we're effectively, sewering all of Lake Bemidji, which again was that regional goal that's existed for at least 50 years. High level overview, just of some of the timing and scheduling that we're looking at. By the end of this year, we're hopeful that we'd have something in place with the county for actually securing that land. We are doing environmental type studies and whatnot over there, doing soil boring and whatnot as we speak. And once we have some of that, then we'll be able to sit down with the county and come to some more agreements. We'll also be able to submit that environmental data to the people that it needs to go to. Some of that is tied into our grants that we have through the EPA. We'll also have to get some of that data to the MPCA. So we're hoping that all that should be wrapped up by the end of the year as well. Tentatively, we would be getting to some sort of construction beginning in 2025, likely late 2025 in the fall. And that likely would also be just the mechanical plant itself, or the map's not up there anymore. Because we probably did the project sometime in the summer of 2025, get the plant going, and then in 2026 is when the substantial pipe laying would happen and actually be doing, the serving roadways and things like that, and some of the things we're going to talk to you with Mark Fuller here about in a little bit as well. I'll go pull the map up real quick again, just to make it clear. Phase two is the blue up here. That one, if we do need more funding just to even make that happen, and we're optimistic that we'll find some of that because the state hasn't given us anything to this point, but we've been in their bonding bills the past couple times that the entire bonding bill just fell apart and they didn't even pass one. But if we did get more funding, which again, we're optimistic that we will, that would be for phase two, 2027 at the earliest. But phase one, we're hoping that will begin late 2025, most of the pipes going in 2026. People would be hooking up, passing the end of 2026, but probably in the spring of 2026. We also have had meetings with the sheriff's department and the fire department. Again, you guys live in a dead end road. We just had the meeting with Lavinia folks on Friday of last week. So just thinking through what the construction process would look like from the emergency services standpoint. We have, several options in place. Both the sheriff and the deputy fire chief weren't overly concerned. They definitely have options. And Mark, and we do have a sheriff representative here today too that can help fill in some details if you guys have any specific questions. I think that's about it there. Some of the project financing, sure, everybody has lots of questions about that. I'm gonna make sure I don't miss anything, so looking at my notes here. Right now, we are estimating the entire project, and when I say entire project, I do mean phase 1 and 2 to be about $19 million. That phase 1 green area, the north and northeast part of the lake, just that part is $13 million. So I mentioned already that we have the $6 million in federal grants. That comes up with almost half of the money that we are looking for phase 1. So then that leaves the other half, about $7 million that we would have to bond for, borrowing that money. We would of course be doing that with the backing of the tax power of the township. We also are talking about throwing in $60,000 from the township's general fund every year for the next 20 years. And some of the thinking there was, especially in County Road 20, those residents pay taxes like the rest of us, but that's a county road, so their tax money hasn't been going to road improvements directly for them. So we figured this was a way to kind of even some of that out and just give some of the general township funds back to their area as well. Okay, so then for specific assessments along with this project, one thing I'll try to clear up right away is the number that we're going to throw out there is $165 equivalent benefited frontage or front footage. That's kind of a target we've been shooting for this whole time, and we got some financial analysis back we've been working with this Ellers group just recently, and we were very happy to see that there's multiple models at work hitting these targets we had in mind. But that equivalent benefited front footage, what that essentially means is we wanted to find a way that you could assess the same rate in a fair manner to parcels, because not every parcel is the exact same shape. So if you were just looking at the front footage along a road, if somebody had a really narrow property up by the road and then they had a super wide property back at the lake, you could get a very disproportionate amount assessed to them compared to the next person who maybe they're the exact opposite shape. So this is some way to average that out. And you can just think of it really loosely in your head. If you had like 100 feet up along the road and 150 feet back along the lake, you're talking about 125 for an average. Again, all we're trying to do there though is find a way to make it fair across all the different parcel sizes and shapes. So $165 was the target that we were shooting for. We figured that the average EBF, equivalent benefited front footage for a lot along the lake, there's 85 square feet. So that puts that assessment at around $14,000. And I should mention right off the bat too, that there would be multiple options for how people would pay this back. It would be one of those things where it'd go on your property taxes and you would have the option most likely to pay that off over the course of 15 years. There also is the idea being thrown around of having a $2,000 connection fee. One of the main reasons why that is the case is because we know not everybody's going to hook up to this system day one, but we do need to get as much cash flowing into the system as we can. So having some of these connection fees will help with that cash flow at the front end of the project. And once everybody's hooked up to the thing across the board, there's going to be no cash flow issues. But we wanted to try to find ways to make this work on the front end as much as we can. That being said, one of the things that the board has been talking about, and we're trying to find ways to make this a possibility, would be that connection fee would potentially be waived for anybody who would hook up in the first year. None of these things are set in stone. I do want to make sure that that's very clear. There's a lot of things that these are moving targets. There's a lot of things that change over time with these projects. One is just the interest rates. We have no idea what they're going to be in like 8 months when we're actually taking these loans out. So that could change things, hopefully for the better. But that being said, what we are shooting for, like I said, is a $2,000 connection fee, potentially waived the first year for anybody who does hook up right away. So that would bring the total for the average size lot, like I said, that was about 85 feet, lineal feet of this EBF, to about $16,000. And then just making sure I'm not missing anything. The other thing that you'd want to know is the monthly fee, and that's coming in at about $55, probably between $55 and $60. And according to, multiple sources, including this elders group that we have been working with, that is very much in line with what you see around the communities in this area, including the city of Bemidji, for their monthly fees, right around there. I think that's about it. Let me double check. And obviously, we're going to answer any questions you guys have. So we'll get to them as soon as we're done with this quick overview. And this is just up here as a visual, just to show you what the cash flow situation was. So again, financial analysis, it is showing that this is a cash flow positive system. And some of the trick, here's 2026, 2034 over on the right. It's just getting as much cash as we can into the system up front. But there's multiple models, and the takeaway here is just that it is cash flow positive. So we do have multiple ways forward from here. And it is subject to more grants too. If we were able to get more grants out of the states this next year, that could change this as well. Only favorably, of course. So then I mentioned phase 2 would be 2027. We do have plenty of good partners down at the state. We were, as far as we know, in both of the bonding bills that fell apart the past few times. So we expect that we will be again in the future, and hopefully we'll actually pass one year soon. Now, I just wanted to quickly touch also on some of the benefits that you guys, as people who would potentially be hooking up to the system, could see from this project. One of them is going to be flexibility in your land use. I'll show you a picture here in a second of what an example might look like. There's just a lot more building options once you're on a sewered lot, zoning wise. Some of it could be cost savings. Again, if you're lucky enough to have been needing to get a new septic system anyways, this potentially could be less expensive than just putting in your own private system. Long term, this is something that should last a lot longer than a private system as well. The lifespan of something like this is probably 50 to 100 years. Private systems 10 to 20 years, depending on how much it gets used, of course. Biggest thing why this has been a regional planning goal for 50 years is just the environmental protection. This is something that many entities would love to see. We're one of the biggest population-wise, I guess, communities in lake size that doesn't have a municipal system around the lake. If you think of people like Detroit Lakes and Alexandria and stuff, like there's big pushes to get those kind of communities onto systems. And Bemidji was no different. People tried to get it going back in the 70s and whatnot, and it just didn't happen. So this would be something that would make a lot of people happy from the environmental standpoint, of course. And then there just really is a lot of more marketability. Many studies show that your increased property values and whatnot from having a municipal system. And the larger community too, I just wanted to touch on that. Having something like this available, our intent has always been that this would be something that can scale. So if we do it in the future, who knows how long, 10, 20 years, have the rest of the township or certain areas, especially over in this area where we have commercial zoned areas, want to get them hooked up to the system would in fact handle that. So this is something that could help attract businesses to the places we want them to go in our commercially zoned areas. As keeping in mind the potential for benefits to the entire township and not even just the people that are hooking up to it day one. So that map I mentioned, over here on the left-hand side, you can see what is the current situation for anybody who's on Lake Bemidji. The big one right off the bat is you have a 100-foot setback. That is set by the Mississippi Headwaters Board. And then you're also gonna, if you're say on County Road 20, you have a 50-foot setback. Other people might be 30. On the side yard is 10 feet. So this is very typical. You see this all the time. You have a house maybe that fits in the setback requirements. There's not even a room for a garage. So they probably got a variance at some point in time to put a garage in. Septic tank, a lot of times people don't even have room for their drain fields, or they fail. You need to find some other solution, and they're going across the road to somebody, their own or somebody else's property that they can work out with to put a drain field in. After the municipal system would go in, this 100 feet drops all the way down to 50 feet. And then of course you can take out the septic system, so that becomes all usable land. And this exact footprint now can meet every single setback without any variances at all. So there is substantial benefit from just the zoning standpoint, the ability to get more bedrooms onto a municipal system than you'd be able to on a private system. Lots of benefits when it comes to the zoning aspect of things. And just from my personal experience through the people that I'm hearing from on the phone in the community that are really excited about this is one of the main reasons why they have building projects coming up, and this just opens up so many possibilities for them. So just wrapping things up before I hand it back over to Mark. Then we got, again, just a long-standing goal. This is something that will protect the Lake Bemidji Mississippi watershed up and down the river for generations to come. The residents who are hooked up to the system, you have a lot more opportunities for land use. And then we do have the big systems that are all end of life and they need something. State Park, DNR records. And then we have touched on this before. It's worth throwing out there. Talk about incorporating into a city. Doing something like this really opens up that door for us as well. That's just another thing that we can check off. When this gets before a judge who would hear a case, they see that we're operating as a city, and just makes it that much easier for them to be like, you should be a city if you're operating as a city. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Mark Fuller, and you'll go over some of the technical stuff.
Perfect. So I'm Mark Fuller with Freeburg and Grund Engineers. We're the engineer on the project. And I've got some faces I recognize from past meetings on this project in the room. We had two main reasons, and feel free to ask questions anytime. We had two main reasons for this meeting today. One predominantly was we had the letter from the folks on Birchmont Court from August 4th of 2023 that asked on bullet point 3 that said, we would like to be notified in writing of any future plans for road work, right of way, or utility work in the future. So this is working toward that in one regard. And our second regard is very similar to what Chris mentioned about last week's meeting on Friday with the residents up on Lavinia. Lavinia is a 1 mile dead end. You guys are much shorter in that 1/4 mile range of dead end, but still problematic from a dead end standpoint, and even much narrower, as you know, nearly half as narrow in that corridor that's allowed for road right now on the Birchmont Court area. Those were the two predominant factors of why we wanted to talk to you folks, and I hope you have some questions about that. Chris did a pretty good job of explaining the general gist, and if you pull that map up, Chris, again, that'd be awesome, of where this project is and what the potentials are. Again, stretching all the way potentially from Northwoods access up along Old 71, County 21, potentially through Birchmont Court, as we've somewhat discussed in the past, working all the way down County 20, into the state park, through the state park onto the north end of Lavinia, and eventually in phase 2, all the way down to the south boundary of the township. The idea originally, as Chris alluded to, was that the township was hopeful they might get a project with sewer and water. That was the idea, hooking into the city, but as he mentioned, that fell apart when there was annexation required, and the township residents had shown strongly that that was not desirable, if avoidable. That being the case, we're now in sewer only for this project. And again, looking at breaking it into multiple phases based on the dollars they have currently. And then looking at that future phase to cover the rest of the perimeter of Lake Bemidji that they can within their jurisdictional boundary. What you would expect to see on this project at any point along the project is something that would look very much like any other municipal system where you have gravity flow of collection mains, and then you're able to hook on with your own private plumber beyond the right of way to the system in a particular timeline, and we can talk about that after a bit. And then that would go to a collection and treatment system where we're looking at that mechanical plant. That would be a smaller version of what the city of Bemidji and other municipalities have. So you're looking at a plant that is fully contained and dispersal of wastewater that's treated, meeting groundwater drinking standards underground versus anything on the surface. So that's an overview of what we would look for from this collection and treatment system. But again, going back to our two main purposes, one being your request and two being wanting to talk about that dead end nature of your potential segment of the project. So I'm hoping you guys maybe have questions, those of you especially that live on Birchmont Court. There are a few faces here I see that live beyond Birchmont Court, and that's fine as well. These are all public meetings. So we had a pretty good turnout last week. I didn't tally it, but I think we probably had 75 or 80 people in here, I would guess. It's good to see more faces today as well. So again, feel free to ask questions about whatever you would like. We do have representation here from county. Thank you, John. And from the sheriff's department, we actually reached out to the fire department and the sheriff's department when we were looking at the dead ends of predominantly, again, Lavinia and Birchmont Court to try to take into account those considerations where we have access issues for ingress and egress. I think that Jess started out by mentioning as the chair that we'd like everybody to get an opportunity to ask a question, and then we can start cycling through with multiple questions from folks as that becomes necessary. So don't hold back on any question you might have. You don't have to stay in one subject lane here. We can talk financing, we can talk routing, we can talk hookups, we can talk whatever you want. We'd like to, actually.
And I wanted to start with saying, like I said, the sheriff's department is here too. Like I said, and if you have anything for them, I'd like to make sure you ask those earlier than later too. I don't, in case they have places to run or in case they get called for some reason, I'd like to make sure they're here to answer those questions. Again, like I said, if you don't mind just stating your name, and then we'll try to go from there. So did somebody have their hand up already? Is that?
Just if you don't mind, I can
Sure.
actually just start off with, I talked on the phone with Steve Hill just a little bit ago.
Sure.
There was some confusion about when the meeting was today, so he wanted me to get his comments in for him.
Sure, that's fine. Go ahead. Wait a minute.
Get them in here. So he was concerned about there being proper communication. And I think it is worth noting to everybody too, if you haven't heard already, because we did send out a newsletter not too long ago. On our website now, on the very front page, there is a form that you can fill out to get onto our email list. And I highly recommend everybody doing that because that's going to be one of the things that we're going to try to use all the time. A project like this, we're going to be putting on monthly communications, even at the very least quarterly communications. And for this meeting, in fact, too, we'd be sent out notices through that system as well. That's only been up there for about a month. Also, on that note, we have only just gotten some of this analysis back in the past month or so, the financial and some of the soil site type stuff. So that's the reason why we're doing this now as well. So we're going to try to communicate as much as we can throughout this whole process. And anybody's welcome to come to any of our meetings, which we have on second and fourth Monday of every month, right? And we're happy to schedule anything too. If enough residents wanted to do something like this again, we're happy to do so. He also was worried about us having the proper right of way, so we could touch on that a little bit. And then he was making it sound like at this point, I don't know how many parcels he had. It's more than one, or in that area that him and his parcels would potentially be against this project. And we want to touch on the right of way one day right off the bat.
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely. So this item number 2, for those of you who had reviewed this letter back in August 2023 and signed that petition, bullet point 1 was we do not believe there is a clear easement or right of way on Birchmont Court. We did quite a substantial amount of research on this, and it's got a storied past there back from being a state highway. A number of plats that were done and redone, and then some items vacated. And that comment is warranted insofar as all we have or all the township has at a minimum is what's being maintained currently. That's the bare minimum that they have. Prescriptive rights, it's called. So where they're maintaining, whether it's mowing or snow plowing, that's all they have in some areas. Now, some areas are platted and it is adjusted. Some areas, for instance, around Steve Hill's parcels, there's actually been lawsuits that went and took place and he was able to get that back in some instances. So it's variable through there. There's no question. One of the items that came up when we had a prior meeting was this idea, and actually Steve brought it up, was this idea that maybe because we have such a narrow corridor, he could at that point have water going down the center and have sewer out on County 21. That was a question that came up, and since he does that plumbing type work, that was a valid idea. One of the concerns we had there was with the distances that we have from those properties to where they would actually be served by. Sewer wouldn't work just because we don't have the elevation to do that. But if there were to ever be water, and that is still an outstanding goal of the township someday to have water here, it could be flopped exactly the opposite and have sewer potentially right down the center, leaving that road as it is today, as well as the trees for the most part, and then putting water in potentially at a later date where we don't have an elevation concern. So we can have a pressurized water system that can flow with no elevation concerns there. Again, just a potential as a feasibility type question there. Hopefully that helps answer some of that. Regarding again, the road right of way, the comment in the letter, or bullet point, excuse me, one was, we do not believe there's a clear easement of right of way on Birchmont Court. It is not abundantly clear. There is a history there and there is the maintenance. So there is at least a prescriptive corridor there through there. Very narrow. As all of you who live on there, which is presumably about 7/8 of the folks here, that corridor gets as narrow as 21 or so feet. It's hyper narrow in places where we've got crabapple trees somewhere on the northwest side and 28-inch Norway pines on the opposite side. So we're very well aware of that. I actually brought along our survey of that corridor where we went out and shot those individual trees because we were trying to figure out at that time back in 2022, actually, whether there was a feasible or reasonable corridor through there that might possibly work prior to having a meeting with you guys in there. Hopefully that kind of addresses some of Steve's items there. I want to piggyback on two of your comments, Chris. One is we love seeing the turnout here. Whoever shows up is great, and they do have the 2 meetings a month. And usually it was just Wayne that's now on the planning department. That was or Joel Johnson. Those were about the only 2 people that showed up. So to see more faces here, we realize everybody is busy as we are, but the more faces the better because they are open public meetings. Secondarily, and probably more importantly, and it should be said with this group that we have here, we are always willing to have these meetings with these subsets of people. Additionally, and we already have 3 people reach out from last Friday's meeting, we're game for meeting individually on site with folks. So that'll be a very, very important thing. One gal in Lavinia has some concern about cedar trees that are 100 years old that are in the right of way, not on her property, but she's very much happy with them. Another gal has 220 feet of property. She emailed us there. And is interested in how this would play in with her property, whether she's going to keep what she has now or whether something else were to get developed in the future. So again, I think this kind of 3-step process, general meetings, they have general meetings, and for the foreseeable future, this project will be on the agenda and has been as a utility project that shows up on the agenda. Secondary, these special meetings, which either you could request or we will keep putting together as necessary. And thirdly, again, individual meetings are no problem whatsoever. That's part of a project like this. If it comes through for you guys, it's something we want to do. Whether that ends up being Chris and I, or just myself or our surveyor, we can go any route we want to go on that for sure. And I do have, sorry about that. I do have my cards here too. So when you're done today, if you have interest, you can pick up my card. It's got my personal cell and email on it. Yeah.
The only thing I want to point out really quick is Christmas talking about, you guys were both talking about attendance. I think there would have been a lot more people here. I just found out this afternoon because my letter said it was for Lavinia. And that's what everybody on Birchmont.
I am happy there.
So see, there's an issue there. I don't know why that happened or.
Do you want to
Yeah,
touch on that,
that's
Chris?
what Steve had pointed out. It was just a copy paste error, so I apologize for that. But like I said, we sent out the emails to anybody in their email list as well, and it's been posted on the website. But we're happy to have another meeting anytime if that's what we need to do. We'll make it great. So.
We'll get started with questions. If anybody wants to go. Sure.
Is the proposed running line under the blacktop today?
Sure.
Is that the proposed running line?
Repeat your name too, sir, please. State your name, please.
Oh,
Too.
I'm sorry, I'm Mark Wambach.
Thank you much.
If there were to be a system on Birchmont Court, it would be under the bituminous surface. And it would have to be essentially right down the center line of existing bituminous. I'll add a follow-up there, and there were some folks here from the Lavinia meeting. There was a lot of question about what would be reconstructed, because there's been folks that have seen rightfully and understandably so, some of the other road projects the township undertakes. If the township undertakes a full reconstruct, they have to meet all state standards. So that is full widths, ditch separations. So we're not proposing a full reconstruct on these segments. Lavinia, or if Birchmont Court is to be a part of this project, that would not be a full reconstruct. Pavement will come out, pavement will go back in. Reason being, again, if you just do a rehab project, you're okay, you don't have to meet all those state standards. But as soon as you do a full reconstruct, now you have to have ditch separation in slopes that are steeper or flatter, excuse me, than 4:1 and the whole shebang. So we're avoiding that.
How many, are you take, just to follow up, are you take after my name for just?
Just state your name.
Leonard Gumley, I'm actually a Lavinia. I came
Sure,
over
sure.
Friday.
I'm glad you're here.
Are you, so we're gonna lose a lot of trees, I assume, in this boat anywhere. You know?
No, a poor assumption. I'm glad you're here though. Thank you
Yeah.
for coming in. The letter.
I just thought, well, they're building a road up on Lavinia, they're putting blacktop in up
Yeah.
there, they wiped out the trees.
So
It's
we
literally,
could, yeah,
if I lived over there, I'd be so offended.
well, let us explain that why, like I said, that's what Mark was just talking
Yeah,
about
I
here.
mean, they
So please,
literally wiped out
Yeah.
the trees
So-
to just put some blacktop.
so let us explain what
Yeah.
happened there for us.
This is good that you're here, and this is exactly what I was alluding to. That project was a project that the township applied for a grant from the State Park Road account and received a grant after years and years, I don't know how many years, but years and years of requests for issues with that, beach lane, wild plum and whitetail.
Yeah.
When you get that money from the State Park Road account, you are required to meet those state standards, one of which is clearing your right of way. And that right of way being 66 feet, and 80 feet, actually. Beach lane's been 80 since it was platted in the early 1900s. So that is a project where it's a full reconstruct and meeting all those standards as a very distinct and different comparison versus either Lavinia or Birchmont Court.
And let me add to that too, just what, part of the reason for that too, that's happening that way is there needs to be ditching there. Part of the reason for doing that project was because the way the water would lay in there and every year that would become such a mess on that road. To get that to fix the actual problem, you just can't fix the problem without making a place for the water to go. You needed the ditches. That was a big reason why we needed that right away, to be able to actually fix that road and not have the continuous every spring problems we have there. So that was,
And part of the easements actually that the two private landowners had signed was requiring that we meet and exceed actually stormwater requirements. So registers and crews both had a stipulation in there, the two private landowners across from the parking area, that we deal with more than the standard stormwater. And in order to do that, we needed that whole right of way anyway. We would have had to clear it regardless, but that's a standard 66-foot right of way on Wild Plum, and it was an 80 forever since it was platted on Beach Lane. So nothing new there for sure.
so as you said too, like, there's never, to tell you guys that there's not gonna be anything changed, anything happening. On County Road 20, the county's dealing with right now, I believe there's one house that has to have a garage moved a little bit. Because
The
it's in,
yellow garage.
it's in the right of way. You know, to sit there and think that nothing, that not one tree is gonna ever die or that nothing's gonna happen, that's not real. We're gonna try to not do it, but sometimes things happen. So, but our goal, like I said, is to follow the footprints where they're at the best we possibly can and not to get outside it and try to create new roads with wider roads with big curb and gutter stuff. That's not the intention. We know what these roads are. They're dead end roads. We need to do something to them, and we're gonna try to stay within those limits the best we can. But like I said, we can't, I'm not gonna tell you, if you'd be coming back to me if when a tree dies, because there's gonna probably be a tree that's gonna die. That's what's gonna happen. When you start doing work, just like you do in your yard. Sometimes stuff happens and some things are probably not gonna survive.
Hopefully that distinction is clear now, that difference, and that's a very, very good example, that example of a state park road account funded road corridor. That I think was about a 2-year process for the township to get through totally, maybe a year and a half. And that being a full reconstruct meeting state standards. Sure.
Jay Haley, Birchmont Court. With regard to the right of way and the setback from the right of way, if there's structures or whatever that's not within the right of way, but it's less than the setback, which I think there's probably a lot of things
Mhm.
on that road, is that gonna be a problem?
No, that one won't be a problem. In fact, the individuals who want to look at it, I've got that map with me as well. Before we're done today, I've got that calls out every tree that's significant. So decorative over 2 inch and anything else over 4 inches is on our survey here. And we can look at individual buildings there. So no, there wouldn't be anything where the township would move a structure there. And township folks, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but they hired us in 2022 specifically to look at that corridor for that purpose. So that sewer project wouldn't necessitate that. If there were ever to be something else, that's a totally different conversation, but the sewer project would not necessitate the location or relocation, excuse me, of a structure.
Additional questions?
Questions, but I don't want to talk.
Other than putting the blacktop back, would there be any other improvements or any other construction other than putting the sewer in and the blacktop back?
As much as it pains me, there would not. If there was a disturbed, and I say it pains me because from a civil standpoint, we'd like to get good drainage and everything everywhere, but it's not gonna happen there. It's gonna go back in. Driveways,
No curb and gutter.
no curb and gutter, no curb and gutter, no storm sewer. If you have a paver stone driveway, which some people do, that would go back in as paver stones. If you have a concrete, it would go back in as concrete. If you have a bituminous, back in as bituminous, and gravel as gravel.
How would you be coming in conflict with the, if you're gonna go down the blacktop, how are you gonna come in conflict with the driveway? If you're in the middle of the road.
Our disturbance corridor, that's a perfect question. So typically, the sewer, and Steve had asked me when he called me on the phone earlier, sewer in this range would be 8 to 12 feet deep. So you can envision a fairly steep and deep trench. And we're gonna need all the width we can get within that corridor between those tree stumps essentially, if sewer goes down there. So you're gonna be, that's where you would do driveways for sure.
Diameter is the pipe.
8 inch. Yep, there's a potential for 10 in one area, only so I can stay flatter on my slope. With a bigger pipe, I can lay it flatter and stay shallower, but 8 or 10 inch. And again, it's varied between 8 and 13 feet deep there.
Can you directional drill it?
We cannot on sanitary main unless we get over about 1.5% slope. But when we get 1.5% slope, then instead of being 12 feet deep, now we'd be at, 18 or 19 or 20 feet deep.
In pothole and mower it, or you can?
No. Our slopes, our typical that's a good question. Our typical sanitary slope is 0.4%. Sanitary main comes in 14-foot lengths and that's 500ths per stick, which is, 5/8 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch. So it's very, very, very flat. Good questions, practical questions. But that, I think back to the start of the question, especially with relation to disturbance of personal property, that's how you would end up disturbing driveways where they tie in. Some of that pavement's only, I think I had as narrow as 19.5 feet in one spot, if I remember right.
So you'll tear that one down.
Correct. Yep, all the pavement would be torn up if this goes through there.
Has the routing of the pipe been finalized yet, or is there still some areas in flux in terms of how you get to the plant?
Two-part answer. There's one area in flux, in this area here. Because we don't know whether we can go and get an easement through some private property owners. Or whether we need to stay in a combination of township and county corridors. Or third option, whether we can stay in a combination of township and state trail corridor. So there's 3 options there. The other part to that answer is unrelated to the treatment site. In a given area, that main, so Lavinia is a very good example from our meeting actually last Friday. Because of the narrowness of Lavinia and Birchmont Court's even narrower, but it's a different story. We are proposing to put the main on one side. We're not certain which side, but likely the west side. And then have a temporary road just laid on top of the turf so that we can traverse in and out and get emergency services in and out as well during construction, as well as phasing it. Lavinia is wider, as I said, than Birchmont Court. Birchmont Court being so much narrower, it's likely that would be right down the center and that there would have to be a temporary route requested through private landowners. Requested being the key term. Can't force anybody to give us a temporary route, certainly. Rutgers being one example, but there's also a landowner, and maybe they're here on the northeast end of Birchmont Court that own both sides, and they're a private landowner, so it's a question there as well. That answer that for now anyway.
Yeah.
If something comes up.
Please.
My question is, we have a sewer system, a mound system that is across the street from our home.
Right,
We have a pipe that goes under the road.
yep, and a lot of people do.
How is that going to affect us?
You guys would end up connecting in on, your side, so the home side of the road, directly to the system if it were to take place, and then that would be abandoned, and you could either abandon it in place or remove it if you have something else you'd like to do with the property.
Well, system's only 10 years old.
Sure.
So if we chose to keep our system, how,
So you wouldn't, that's also a good question. Tentatively, what the township is looking at is that if this goes online in approximately 2 years, you would have up to 5 years after that 2 years before you had to hook up.
have to hook up?
You have to
Eventually,
hook up.
yes.
Yep, eventually you have to hook up to the system.
Yeah,
And that was where I think Chris mentioned, excuse me, that there's this potential for a hookup fee. That if you were to hook up right away, you would not have to pay that right away, maybe being 12 months, maybe 16, somewhere in there. And then anybody after that would essentially be penalized for not hooking up right away, as a motivator to get the system, online.
so let me talk about it as a board representative too. So that's something we went back and forth on for a long time. When we started talking about this project, about whether there'd be mandatory immediately, eventually, whatever. We come to the end of it, we started looking at where we're at and how old systems are. We felt like giving people a possible 7 years, hopefully that kind of accounts for a significant amount of time from right now where we're at. The county, I know, and they've said that if there's some systems that are currently failing, they are willing to see some temporary solutions that are short-term, not that they would not generally allow for homeowners who are having problems right now. But they're knowing that there's a project coming, they're willing to work with residents who have that, so they don't have to expend a bunch of money in the next year or two when we're in the process of doing this to put a whole new tank in. Understanding, like I said, we understand that there has been some residents who have put in significant value into their systems. We get that. And we appreciate that. But the reality is at some point we have to set a timeline. And right now we've kind of put in our minds as 5 years. Nothing has been finalized yet. That's what our initial discussions have been that we're looking at right now. And that's trying to keep it so we get people on the system and also meet the intents of what the federal government has given us for tax dollars. They have a purpose for what they've given us $6 million to do. I mean, this is not insignificant money. And to get that money with the groups that have advocated for us, to say that we're not going to put people on the system eventually to protect the lake, as they've done in other places, would be doing a disservice to the people who have given us these funds over the last number of years. So we think that's very important, to respect the investment from our government to give us these dollars and to make sure we're doing right. Anybody else want to add to that? Who's been involved with these discussions, Mike or Kurt or Gary?
Yeah, did you have your question answered though regarding having, if you left your system there for 5 years, are you
Yes. well,
able to work around it?
Yeah.
Would it be,
Can my
Say
system-
that again?
can my system be left there if I choose? not-
Yes, they would, if you were gonna leave I see where you're going, I apologize, I'll wrap back around, I think Jeff was maybe gonna ask the follow-up. That would be the contractor, if this was awarded, would have to protect your system.
Okay.
And make sure that that is still in place, not indifferent from if there's a private utility like a Midco or a Beltrami Electric, but very similar, so you could elect, let's say today is that day. You could elect, being 10 years into your system, to let that go and recoup some of what you put into it for another 6.5, 7.5 years. And then connect up at that end there at that point. And they would have to protect your system and any others. We're aware of at least, 20 or 30 around the lake that at least have them like that. I apologize for getting off track there.
So Mike, you, was it?
Jeff, does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize for that.
Right, Mike?
There's a couple things that we haven't talked about. And a year and a half or 2 years ago, when we were talking about doing a water sewer project, we were talking about expanding that corridor there quite a bit. When we laid out everything. So it was gonna be a definite different project 2 years ago when we were looking at water and sewer. And that was also gonna be difficult for the township because we were gonna have to work with everybody on getting a wider corridor. And then the road would have been built differently when it was put back in. So this is a half of what the project was before. The other reason is we're trying to make sure that we cover our border the system covers our border completely, that we go from Northwest Landing all the way around to our border on the southeast side of Lake Bemidji. I think we heard loud and clear early on that there wasn't very many people that were in favor of being annexed into the city of Bemidji. Us providing our own utilities goes a long ways into keeping us independent from the city of Bemidji. Nothing is guaranteed, but it's one of the boxes we need to check. So to hopscotch and leave out a section here and a section there just leaves those residents open for potential annexation, either by ordinance and or by petition. So I don't want to make any bones about the fact that, you know, besides protecting Lake Bemidji and providing a service, we're also looking at protecting the township as a whole.
Agreed. And to do this kind of investment again from the township is not just assessing every dollar out. The township is expending money too. To do these things and to expend money, we need to make sure that we keep our tax base that we have in place. We, as the population diagram showed, we've lost over 1,000+ residents in just the last 10 years, the last 5 years, I think, to the city through annexation. We've been so fortunate that the developers in our community who have continued to build here and continue to build businesses, homes, that we've been able to maintain our population base as it's been, and people doing what they've done in the houses, and it's helped to maintain that loss. So we appreciate that, but we need to set it up sometime. We can't spend money on a project of this nature and then think that we're going to start losing half of it to an annexation to another jurisdiction at some point. If we're going to do this, we need to protect the entire rest of the township. Yes, sir.
You estimate for us, there's another cost here, I assume. We're gonna have to dig up our properties from our house out to the road with our own hiring plumbers, correct?
Correct,
Now, you're not gonna do that for us.
correct. Yep,
And so if my house is back 30 yards, let's say, from the road.
yep,
I haven't measured it, but I'm at least 100 feet, I think, from Lavinia Road.
right.
Can you and then I have a relatively new septic system. Can you estimate for me the other costs I will face in one of hiring a plumber to do that? Plus, I assume you're gonna want us to remove our septic tanks, correct?
Perfect question, and those came up at length on.
Right, so and I'm asking for my property, what's an average cost we might expect?
We can't speak to an average cost, but we expect that we might pay $50 to $100 a foot per a plumber, all in combined for that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to take out your old system. There were a number of people adamant that, well, no, I'm fine, I'm gonna leave it, I don't have any other plans on the property. Whereas others, certainly, as Chris showed in this diagram, will make use of a property where you have a mound system or a tank or something now. So you don't have to take that out, but most people will. If you're not gonna use that, most of those tanks can be pumped, crushed and filled, if it's just a tank. If it's a mound system, then that infrastructure could be taken out as well. I don't have a cost for that private plumber work on removal of a septic, but we expect again that $50 to $100 a foot for a private plumber to
For a private plumber to.
approximately. Yep,
So what is the $2,000 hookup fee then? Since we're paying for the hookup.
Right.
The proper, is that just an assessment that you're doing on top? What is that? What's that for?
Incentivizing trying to get hooked up to the system as soon as possible and acknowledging that those folks that don't hook up right away are not benefiting the system to run efficiently as it can. And so trying to, again, make sure that we get that hooked up. And additionally, if we go past that first year, during that first year, you're going to have disturbance at the surface already. And trying to get as much of that disturbance put back together as soon as possible and having fewer interactions. So an acknowledgement in addition, there's more interaction for the township and the county and everybody else if those connections don't take place right away. The board may have another separate answer to that as well, potentially.
I think it's people who have been involved in this thing, it's more common than not to have hookup fees. Am I correct in saying that with a lot of these?
There's usually an access charge, yeah.
So what we're trying to throw an option out there of not doing that, if people hook up immediately. We're trying to throw that out there and to realize that, like I
Well,
said.
promise to do it immediately, you wouldn't charge, there wouldn't be a $2,000 hookup fee. That's only to punish, to urge everybody.
It's not meant to punish. It's
Well,
meant,
in a way it is.
it's not meant
Some
to.
people will do it right away, and then they're subsidizing the people who don't do it right.
It's in the eyes of the beholder how they look at it, but like I said, there's costs to maintaining the system. If we get everybody on it right away, we don't need to account for that extra cost. But if people don't utilize it, then we still have to maintain those costs that are being taken care of. So this is the fact of the matter is that we're trying to incentivize to get those costs covered upfront with everybody rather than wait till later and try to think that somebody else is going to be covering those costs, because we have to be covered somewhere.
There is very few municipalities that do not have a sewer access charge or a water access charge after the fact. The city of Bemidji's, I know, has both fees. Residents in Birchmont, when Birchmont was done, had the ability to waive those fees if they hooked up within a certain period of time. After that, it's very, very common. And as Jess alluded, there's ongoing costs from day one for whatever governmental unit is administering the system. And so therefore, the more people that hook up to it right away, the lower your operating costs are per household.
I'm sure you appreciate this and went into your factory, but I'm looking at this just as a person who has a relatively healthy septic system. In fact, if you look at Lavinia on there, Lavinia seems to be, by years and stuff, seems to be doing pretty well. We're all going to be hit, as I'm looking at this, at a minimum of 16,000. We're going to be hit with plumbing fees that are going to add $1,000 to $2,000 more. That seems almost light to me, because I can just imagine how this dig is going to go from my house all the way up to the road. And then the yearly fee is another 700 somewhere roughly, just to pay the monthly fees. Whereas if I sit here right now, my entire cost after having put a good septic system in is $200 to Botsy Con Pump about every third year. But instead, I will be paying well over $20,000. Right? I mean, isn't that really what we're talking about? Just in the first 3 to 5 years.
I guess I'll try to answer that. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and there's definitely some people who there's probably the minority of houses on Lavinia and on Birchmont who have 100-foot setback from and meet all the requirements of a lakeshore. I think we could drive around. I drove around Lavinia last week just to drive and see. Very few houses are outside of 100 feet.
Agreed.
So we're trying to meet the spirit of what the Mississippi Headwaters requires here, the watershed district requires, is to meet that 100 feet. That's not going to happen. So the only way to do that and to try to cover it, to make sure we're treating our lake the best we can, is to put something in place that's inside of that system, 150 feet. That's my goal. That's the way I look at this. And the reality is that we know that not everybody needs it right now, but eventually you're going to need a septic replacement.
Yeah, eventually, hope I live that long. Do you have evidence that that the county or the township or the state has done that over the last 5 years, Lake Bemidji is in worse condition than it was 5 years ago? Let's say, I picked out a number randomly there. So I'm looking at, is there pollution taking place right now from what's happening along the Northern Township that's making Lake Bemidji a worse place and more polluted than it was 5 years ago?
Well, that question was asked, and I guess, Gary, you can kind of speak to that a little bit. I mean,
Yeah, I talked to a couple of things that, at the Lavinia meeting, one of the things that kept coming up was the high water table, which means that there's not a whole lot of separation from wherever your septic system is to where that water table is. So there's definitely some leaching that's occurring in these systems, whether they're functioning or not. You may think your system's just fine. There is some leaching that occurs.
Are they measuring it? That's what I'm wondering. I assume people come and measure Lake Bemidji for various pollutants.
Yes, I was gonna go there.
Okay.
And they are monitoring water quality. There's nutrient loading that's occurring in these systems, and Bemidji's no different. It has nutrient loading. It gets nutrient loading from the city, from their plant as well. These nutrients don't leave the lake. They're sequestered in there right now as zebra mussels, which makes the water look really clear. But water clarity is not the same as clean water. You measure for a number of different things, phosphorus and things like that. And phosphorus can get tied up in vegetation because the water's clear, you got more vegetation. That doesn't mean that the nutrients have left the system. So the lake is aging, and it's a constant thing that's going on, whether it's the city, this system, that system. And to go around and measure how much an individual system is contributing to that is almost impossible. You can look at these systems and they get inspected to see if they're working, but to measure the nutrient loading from that into that shallow groundwater is almost impossible. So no one knows how much it's contributing on a day-to-day basis, year to year, but there certainly is some contribution.
and I think one thing to remember too, it's our Birchmont Beach neighbor, or Birchmont residents, they obviously, the water quality in some areas might show that they've been a little bit better over the last 10 years because they just put a huge system in there, which that took a huge load off with the contamination that was happening to the lake. So luckily, some of that's happened, that there's been some benefit there. I don't know if there's actually been a benefit to the lake or not, but whether it's zebra mussels, whether it's not, but luckily we've had our neighbors have put systems in to try to protect that. And I would like to think that we do our part on the north side to make sure that we can help protect too, just like they expended the money on Birchmont to do. The rest of the lake, hopefully can do the same thing to try to help make sure that this lake stays as what it is. That's, I guess, a simplistic view, but that's the way I look at it. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, before we leave, it's been kind of a moving target in regards to where you're gonna start and what phase is what, and 1 phase, 2 phase, 3 phases. So, and I'm still a little confused. Could you put some, where are you gonna start?
Sure.
And then where are you gonna go to? And can you put some rough timelines on, we're gonna start right here, and phase 1 is this, and we hope to start on this date and do construction and be done by this date, because like you covered it earlier. Could you just summarize that? Because that's been kind of a moving target, and us at Birchmont Court are kind of confused on that.
Sure, absolutely. So I think there's 2 parts. One is a political part, and one is an engineering part. I'll start with that engineering part, and then the board can follow up on the remainder. We were first approached actually by City of Bemidji, 2 years before we were approached by the township on this. And at that point, that project went from Northwoods Access, so right at north side of Northwoods Access where the portable johns sit there.
Yeah.
All the way around to the state park. That was the project. That remained the project, that scope, all the way until we got past the City of Bemidji being involved because of the annexation. At that point, the project expanded to be all of Northern Township boundary. That's where the only change was on that easterly side where it changed to blue. Intermixed within there were conversations with the folks on Birchmont Court about desirability or not, and the change from water or sewer or both. And so I can't speak as well to that political end of it, but the scope of this project throughout my tenure on the project has remained the same, with the exception of expanding down that east side of Lake Bemidji. So again, that southwest limits, or that west side limits, has remained the same for us all along. And that would be shown in our estimates. If we went back and looked at our historical estimates, which are all dated, the only thing that changed is after we got this letter and petition, the township asked that we separate out the dollars specifically related to Birchmont Court. Same spreadsheet, but just separate dollars.
So construction would start first on Birchmont Court.
Construction would start out at the mechanical plant first, actually, because we have to have that constructed in order to take flow, and then generally work upstream. So on that subject, generally work upstream from where that easterly connection would be, work our way up Lavinia, through the state park, across the north end of the lake, and then down to the west as far as we go.
So we'd be last.
You'd be last on construction, yep. The furthest extent from the mechanical
That
plant,
can change by that.
with the exception of phase 2,
Got ya.
phase 2 being separate.
I thought it was the opposite.
Sure. And it actually, off the bat, it would have been.
Okay.
That's another thing that kind of helps us functionally with this system, is that we have some of our largest users in that area, Rutgers, generating flows at that tail end of the system that are more regular flow.
That helped.
I think I should mention, actually, since it came up 5 or 6 times at the Friday meeting, there was a question that came up pretty often about who's paying, how are they paying? Rutgers is paying proportionally based on their flows versus a single family residence. So it's not it's not a sliding scale, it is just proportional. So if you as a resident generate approximately 225 gallons per day, they generate about 8,000 to 11,000 gallons per day, and will pay that much more factored in on top of their assessment, actually.
Any other board want to add to that, Mike or Gary or Kurt?
I think one thing that hasn't been talked about is how these costs are being appropriated. You know, the $6 million that we've received in the grant so far, a large percentage that's going to pay for the plant. Okay, because everybody uses the plant. After that, with the additional monies that the township is going to put in with the assessment, it gets down to, in our model, it looks like that you're actually going to be paying approximately 60% of the pipe cost. The plant is covered by the grant, plus there's some money left over from that to help with the collection. So the residents are actually, instead of being assessed as in some projects, 75 to 100% of a utility project, we're looking at 60% of the collection process. So I know it's a number. I know that just sounds like a number, but it is, the township is working as hard as we can to, obtain as much money as we can to keep the cost down. But the idea of coming into a project like this and maybe being in on those kind of percentage numbers, that's pretty reasonable for this type of a project. Not that you want it, not that everybody wants it, but it is a pretty reasonable share.
Anybody who hasn't had a chance to ask a question, I would like to ask anything yet? I know most people have, but there's a few of you, if you have anything right now, that's, yes, sir.
Crown Hills part included in this.
Crown Hills Court is not. There's two residences that are adjacent to 20 that are.
Right on the corner.
Correct. So I see one that's a friend of mine here that is not included, for instance.
So then a question, when you talked about like assessments, people that live on the back lots, on the back side of the road, are they going to get assessed at the same rate? You talked about being billed as, let's say, an average 85-foot lot, but if you have a 400-foot lot, you're going to get billed 5 times or whatever.
You are.
What any other user is going to be billed at.
That's exactly correct, yes. And so same billing rate, front or back, no change there. It's per equivalent benefited foot. And yes, it is that 165 as an approximate. Again, Mike brought that up. We don't know those numbers exactly, but $165 times whatever width your lot is.
Okay.
Yep, that's the perfect question. So yes, a 400 was.
There was a fairness issue there, I think.
Yeah, no matter how you do it, there's definitely a fairness. That's a very typical methodology for doing it, is going by equivalent benefited frontage. Your 400 versus 85 is a very good example, for instance.
So the person with the 400-foot lot, let's say, whatever it is on the backside, instead of the 15 or 16,000, they'd be looking at 50,000 or 60,000.
Correct.
Assessment.
Reason being that person with zoning standards could subdivide that parcel tomorrow and sell it off into pieces.
Right, but they wouldn't be able to connect. Maybe you need to change your connection charges.
Wouldn't be able to connect. Everybody
There's
adjacent.
only one person on that 400-foot lot that's gonna connect. If they subdivide it, then there would be other connections for the other houses that would be subsequent.
No question. So,
Not
yeah,
like, not like a 16,000, I mean, you'd be talking like the $2,000 fee, not the $16,000 fee. As far as if you divided it up and say 5 parcels or 4 parcels into that. Then
right.
it wouldn't be, you wouldn't be paying again a $16,000 hookup fee, you'd be paying a $2,000 hookup fee. Because the assessment is on the square footage that's there. I mean, as a township president, this has happened before, people have bought lots, and then I know they maybe don't have intents, but once things happen and there's availability, their lots become maybe more desirable and things sell, things change, and that happens. I mean, we can't really deal with what the person's intentions are right now. We have to try to be fair and try to be consistent. And that's part of the way with assessing the large numbers to the state park and to the DNR and to Rutgers, is that we have to find something consistent. And we can't really differentiate with that because they're paying probably a quarter plus of the total assessment between just those 2 or 3 entities, the DNR, the state park, and Rutgers. And we're paying about a quarter roughly of that assessment.
there's about $1.5 million in that alone.
Just between those 3.
But good question. Again, reason being those lots could be subdivided.
Yeah. Well, Rutgers has 400 users.
Yep.
400 users.
Yep.
There's only 4 users.
Yep.
Rutgers and the state park are also being charged on both sides of the main where, somebody else is just being charged on one side of the main. Good questions. Very good questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Any of the costs for this being spread over the whole Northern Township by an increase in our Northern Township taxes, the part of our taxes?
Yeah. It's a good question. Right at the beginning, when Mark was talking, that one of the things that we're doing is we're planning on spending $60,000 a year of road monies that we would generally do. That's how part of the road is getting paid for part of this project. About 1.2 million of it is coming from township funds. That's what the township is paying off the rest of the township dollars, or the taxpayers. We're all paying for that. About that 1.2 million is coming from right now in our model at $60,000 a year.
And that's kind of trying to recoup some expenditures. So the township doesn't assess for roads now. So they've reconstructed Aspen and Whiting and Town Hall, but they haven't put, and correct me if I'm wrong, board, but you haven't put any dollars into Birchmont Ct or Lavinia for long time.
Yeah.
And trying to get some of that money back to the residents who paid a lot of taxes in for those roads. And utilizing that for those specific roads that happen to be on this project.
I don't want a person to misunderstand, but this is not a new levy we're putting out there. We're not putting a levy out there for $1.2 million. This is, we're taking the dollars that we're planning on spending them road dollars right now. And whether we're gonna have to levy additional monies or not, that's not the current conversation. No, we're planning on expending $60,000 of our road budgets right now on this project. So it's not new tax dollars. It's just that money that we feel like these taxpayers, Birchmont Court, living your residents have been paying, that they should reap some benefits of that too. And so we're spreading it out over a 20-year period and possibly bonding for it. But that's our current plan. Does that understand? Am I saying that right, you guys, for the board members?
So, ability of a new levy or an increased levy over the years as you're doing an upkeep for this system.
I don't know what to say about that, I guess.
I guess the best I could say there is that the system analysis that Ellers has done in combination with our numbers show us being positive, plus putting aside every year to an asset reserve, with the funds in the project aside from any other levy from the township. So the goal would be to keep that going, as a self-sustaining entity. And that's what we've budgeted for the township. Putting in $10,000 a year for, say, lift station maintenance and those items that are above and beyond normal O&M, operations and maintenance.
And the township now has those funds available, or you anticipate to have those funds available annually to put in towards this project.
That's our current plan right now. Like I said, we haven't got into 20-year budgets right now, cycles talking, but that's what we're talking about right now. Can you state your name too? I never got that on our
Oh, I'm
record.
sorry, please, Millhouse.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Did
Mr.
you
Joe.
move this question?
Sure,
Sorry.
Joe. You go ahead, Joe.
No, you go first.
Okay, I just, so to confirm, you're not talking about widening Birchmont Court.
Correct?
You're not talking about curb and gutter anymore.
Correct.
You can go right down the middle of the road,
Correct.
which will for sure result in a lot of tree loss.
Well,
And I know you guys did that and made it clear that was good. But how will you handle if you have to get close to somebody's an easement or rows? How will you handle that if somebody will say, no, we don't want you to come that closer?
I'm gonna take that back one step. One thing we offered and part of the reason the township had us do this individual tree survey is that we would like to meet any owner out there and actually stake out a potential disturbance corridor at that time to look at individual trees actually.
How will you curb it? You're going down the middle, you're going down the middle about an hour. You know,
Yes,
the tree is like close to where you can go down, especially in the narrow part.
So for instance, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but if not, there are some examples here where I have an 8-inch crabapple tree or 5 4-inch crabapple trees adjacent to each other. It is likely those would go. That's one of the narrowest segments. There's two 6-inch.
Goes down.
Yes, there's 2 6-inch oak trees adjacent there as well, just to the northeast. And then another, what's by Katy Hills actually, where it gets very, very narrow. It's down to about 21 feet there. And there are 2 6-inch elms, an 8-inch poplar and a 6-inch crab on various sides of the street. And those we would look to have a meeting and see if that was acceptable or amenable to go. The idea being in the direction given by the board actually being that as we work up this corridor and we've got, 10-inch oak and 15-inch spruce, 2 14-inch oak, 30-inch pine, I would never guess there were that big of trees there. 32-inch pine, that those would be heavily protected and not be disturbed or taken, but that there would be some smaller trees that would be taken if this project is still forward there.
Okay, so then how would you, if you got too close to somebody's property, how would you handle, right easements or right away access?
Again, the interactions with each individual landowner to see what their preference is on where that might go. I can envision a situation, for instance, halfway up, where we have a garage that's about 4 or 5 feet off the edge of the bituminous, where we might have to shift slightly. Secondarily, we would require that a contractor pull what's called a trench box to keep that disturbance narrow, but realizing that we're gonna be very, very tight in there no matter what.
Then so we do have a name or how do you know that?
The township has indicated that they would prefer not to do eminent domain. I think at a prior meeting, they had indicated that they would like to have conversations with anybody and everybody first to see what's, potential going through there and then, hope that they can work with everybody, through each segment potentially.
And then what happens if it doesn't? Then you just take it.
I sadly can't speak for the town board on that. They may want to answer that, but if there was somebody in the middle of the project, it's potential that that could preclude the project from being functional on both sides of that.
And again, I know somebody addressed it, I think it was you, maybe, that you can't go out to Bemidji Avenue.
Oh, correct. Just because of elevation. So it's those longer services that become an issue. And this is back, I don't remember who asked the question about slope. I think we were talking about slope, Mr. Wambach. When I can run him, sorry about that. I didn't, no, I just lost your attention for a moment. When we run municipal main, I can run at 0.4%, but plumbing code doesn't let you run any flatter than 2.2%. So you can gather that 2.2 versus 0.4 eats up a ton of elevation. And you'd end up with that main, if it was to be functional without having a pump, a lift pump, you'd have that main, 20 or more feet deep out there. Plus, there's a bunch of folks, I think that when we talked to Birchmont Court folks before, there's a bunch of folks that don't own property on both sides. There's a number of them that would have to get permission from somebody else who may or may not want to give them permission to run a sewer line through their property. What's that?
People in Birchmont Court.
I don't know that number.
Saying people want it on Birchmont Court, and last meeting that we were at.
Well, I can tell you that I don't have one of the things I think we've talked about is, I think, Chris, you talked about with us, or not today, but we talked about last week, was us doing a survey, send out something to you, got to the residents about trying to get an idea of like of age of septic systems, needs, like if you'd be hooking up right away, trying to get a rough idea from this. I can tell you that I understand what you're saying, Jill, that you don't think anybody wants there. We've had private conversations, and I'm not going to divulge people who have came to us and talked to us after the fact, but they came and they live on that road and have asked for it, and they want to make sure that they're included. No, I don't know the numbers, but I don't know the numbers exactly, but I know that we've had more than a couple that have came and talked to us about wanting to have something put in there. Like I said, I guess the only way that we would see it is when it went through there, who would hook up immediately and not. I guess that would be the big thing to see who would have the need right away.
Probably the people who systems need to be replaced soon are the ones that come to you and say, let's do this. So we'll let the other property owners who don't need this, they'll help subsidize us, and we'll get our sewage on having to do a new septic system.
But I'd hope to.
You are pitting people against each other
Oh,
in this process for their own, just by their self-interests. Don't you think, really?
Well, the other thing is that it's total protection for the township. It's from one end to the other. We don't have the luxury of leaving out one neighborhood or another neighborhood. This goes from one end of the township to the other end. It's started out all about protecting Lake Bemidji. It developed into people being able to use their property for other reasons than a mound system. It's developed into being able to have more bedrooms, bigger houses, stuff on your back lots. There's a lot more to it than just who needs it today and who needs it tomorrow. We had that comparison of if you ask people today, did a poll, maybe a third of the people would not want it no matter what. A third of the people would want it, and a third of the people would need it in the very near future. We're never going to get everybody, no utility project. It's a rarity for a utility project to have total support of everybody that's affected. And here we're trying to do an awful large project that, as long as I've sat on this board, is always been something that people, different segments of the lake have come to us and wanted. Not everybody all at one time, but I just wished, that we look at it as in its entirety. Yes, it affects everybody that's in the affected area. Some people need it, some people don't. But that we don't have a lot of choice on how we're going to approach this. We don't get to skip a neighborhood here, a household here, so on. That's not how utility projects work.
I want to remind everybody too, people don't remember this. Back in 2021, I believe, when we had our meeting at the fairgrounds, the reason that meeting was held was because the city and certain residents had started discussions about doing a sewer project and water projects down this. We asked the residents there to come together of all the townships about who wanted us to be there. People came and they were overwhelming that they wanted us to do something. They didn't want to be annexed. So this is our response to how this is that we're trying to do something. Is it perfect? Is everybody happy? I know they're not. I know some people are not happy, but we know that there's a large majority is. This was the best thing that we could come up with, was to find the solution to like help the residents who wanted to stay Northern Township residents, make sure we provide services to the places that need it. And let's not kid ourselves, there's places that absolutely do need it. I mean, we can drive around the lake and we see problems that there is people, some small older places that do need some work. We know some of the businesses, we know the state park with the opportunity they have to do the remodeling. They're very greatly needed. So this is to try to meet those needs and also to protect the wishes of what we heard from the residents that came to us to that meeting with like 400 people, 300 people, whatever it was, and said that they did not want to be annexed. And so we're trying to do that as a township, and that's what we've taken on, a large undertaking that, to be honest, if anybody thinks we're doing this because we get something out of it, this is pain in the.
I love this democracy thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I love these, town meeting, we're all here, we're discussing the issues, and, I wish I'd been aware of this 2 years ago, or a year ago, or about 2 months ago. But hypothetically, in a if we wanted to stop you, all right, if we wanted to stop you, what would be our option? Do we, other than voting you out of office and electing a board that would say no, is there any other thing, just hypothetically, if we're on the side that, can we ask for it to be a referendum? Do we petition? Or is it simply, we have a board, I assume you voted for it unanimously? We're not, maybe we're there, I don't follow the votes. Was this project voted for unanimously by?
The last time that we put together to move forward with where we're at, there was unanimous vote to move forward.
All right, I don't even know how many people are on the board, that's.
Right now, there's 2 elections, myself would want included, anybody. And then there's 3 other positions or one other position that's running, with 3 candidates who are running in that one too. And that'll be up in the.
This fall, there's how many candidates?
2 positions are open this fall.
And how many total are on the board?
5.
And so even if we voted the 2 out and put in, we'd still lose 3, the opponents would still lose 3-2, I take it.
Like I said, I'm not gonna comment
No,
anymore
I
on
mean,
that.
it really is, let's just go hypothetically that I get where you're coming from, and I'm sympathetic to it in a lot of ways. Well, it's in the end, I weigh it all and I say, nah, I'm just against this. Other than voting the people out of office who voted for it, is there anything short of that me as one of the affected residents can do to stop the project?
I think as you guys follow politics, that's probably the way to do it. Is to try to,
Okay.
we've made up our minds to move forward. We've spent money, we've raised money.
I can read your sincerity and I buy it from all of you. So I'm not in any way doubting your belief in it.
One of the things I'd like to say is I have probably been in this whole project process the most skeptical, and the person that's saying, do we really need this? Do we really need this? And asking that question, is it worth it? But in the end, after listening to all the benefits and the pros and cons or whatever, I've changed my mind. Again, did I agree with everything? No, I'll be honest with you, I don't, and I still maybe don't. But in the end, a decision has to be made. Do we go forward or we don't? And that's what we've done as a board, so.
Yeah, so just, I want to make that really clear. I appreciate this. I'm actually learning things and I'm probably leaning more forward than when I came in here.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
I'm not sure I've crossed that line yet.
Well,
So-
we're making progress with you, that's all I care about.
I've had a lot of questions. I just have one more. Let's assume we do this project and we get to start to Lavinia, you hit to the far northeast side there.
Sure.
And how long would it take you, assuming normal weather, to get from one end of Lavinia to the other? And now you've torn up the road, you've rebuilt, and the same with Birchmont Court. Once you finally get to Birchmont Court, how long do you think it would take where we have a road that's completely devastated?
So I like your caveats, weather being one of them.
Weather's gotta be
Yep,
one of them.
weather's a good one. That was actually a substantial piece of that conversation on Friday as well, so that's good. You've got perfect timing to bring it up. And these 2 groups, Birchmont Court and Lavinia, are the most impacted by that because of the dead end nature of that. We expect that Lavinia portion, which is a mile long from Beach Lane access on, or very nearly a mile, could take a couple months of those phase steps there. And when I say a couple months, that's getting from start of disturbance to getting back to passable in a regular manner where you'd have class 5 aggregate base back on. Bituminous paving would take a lot longer. That's often a time crunch thing where we're not doing it. We talked about Lavinia actually, and this will be good because I can bring it into Birchmont Court as well. Then maybe we would have 5 or 6, and when I say maybe, I'm only saying that because we don't know that number of steps of work through there. So we have to get emergency services in there and out of there and be able to get a fire truck in and out. That being the case, we're shifting that main over on Lavinia and trying to work in phased areas that may be 4, maybe 5, maybe 6 different steps, until we get those back to fully passable.
We can get to our residents, can we not?
Correct, correct.
Just want to make sure.
By boat.
With one exception, and this gets asked on all of our construction projects. Anytime you involve something like a culvert or a pipe underground, access will be continuous but not instant. That makes sense?
Line us up and
So-
rows and wait
Right.
for the people at the other end to come out, okay?
If you have an instance where we're putting in a culvert or a pipe under your driveway, there will be a number of hours where you can't get to your individual driveway, but traffic can still pass through the project as a whole. That's a pretty good way. On to Birchmont Court. Birchmont Court, if that's to go, there's so many fewer residents there relative to Lavinia that you're over the course of a few weeks, we would hope to get the project back to regularly passable, not having bituminous on. Again, in our construction world, for this type of project, we would have dewatering, which is bringing down that water table so they can do work in a relatively dry environment. Remove bituminous surfacing, remove any driveways, any of those items that are through the corridor. Put in the main, that would be one pass of an excavator coming through, second pass coming through and putting services out to the right of way. Or if there's no right of way, out to where you might connect onto it. And then getting that back into a passable condition of aggregate surfacing before nearing the end of the project, a paver would come in and actually pave those roads again. So that's a key distinction there is there's a break there where you would have, gravel surface again for some time.
Chair doesn't have control of ice.
I was just thinking whether we can ask them to stop for the afternoon, but I don't know if we should or not.
That's cost control, right? So you ask them to stop, they're gonna charge.
Yeah.
No, that's really good questions. I think one thing that came up last Friday that hasn't come up yet today, but is critical, and if it came up and I missed it, I apologize. The township is still applying for other grant opportunities here. So they're trying to present a worst case scenario from a monetary standpoint with the hopes that they are successful on some more grants. Having started with that $5 million federal EPA grant that comes with all the strings attached to it. Then receiving a second $1 million grant on a separate year cycle, 2022, then 2023, or another $1 million. They're hopeful that they can get some more. Those are both federal. They're hoping for some state. And the intention generally, correct me if I'm wrong, board, but the intention generally would be if they were to get more, that would go toward reducing those outlays to each resident.
Was there a vote on a bond issue then? Yes.
Well, me and Chris were down at the state capitol this year, but there was just no bond. We had presented, we have submitted a bond request for this, for I believe like 8, what was it? Just how much would we put in for, was it 10, 12 million or? Okay, we put in for 10 million this year. We had a hearing, we were there, right now, nothing passed. Right now, our representative is not running for re-election and he's, we've worked already the representatives that are one of them anyways, that is, running for that position and hopefully that they'll carry this forward. We mentioned it to them already, hopefully they'll carry it forward into the next session. I'm not gonna get into that. I'm not going there. I will say both of the representatives in the past, we've had conversations with the one who's running against. They've both indicated that this is an important issue to them. So I don't think there's one that would say no to this. Yes, sir. Yep.
Joe McMurray, I live on Lavinia Road.
Sure. Thank you.
I'd like you to explain a little bit about this dewatering we keep talking
Sure.
about. What do you do with the water? What's involved in that?
Sure. So, anytime we have to do utility work down, deep in the ground and we're adjacent to a water body like Lake Bemidji, we need to do a dewatering, which is actually putting in well points. So they're like a well, but much shallower and they're PVC with a screen on like a well. And we actually depress that water table in a very short area there, in order that we can get a stable base in order to install the utilities. Such that we're not down in the water table, and having collapsing trenches or having any structural issues. So that dewatering, that came up actually in conversation on Friday as well for the Lavinia residents. That's an engine, and you've probably seen them, a big blue engine sitting next to the road on a trailer, and that's running nearly continuously at a low idle for a long time, days and days, in order to draw that water table down temporarily in a very small area. It also brings up a point, if somebody has a shallow well used for irrigation, which my guess is not many people do since you're so close to the lake, but if somebody had a shallow well for irrigation, we've seen those go dry before. Because we might draw that water table down by 5 feet, 6 feet, in order to get down below our mains in that location. That's a perfect question.
Where's the water?
We have to disperse, clean water, in a path that does not disturb the surface. So we can disperse it anywhere onto the private corridor and the public corridor that does not, wash out or create gullies or rills. But since it's groundwater, we don't have an issue with, treating, thankfully.
Thing dump in my yard.
Water yard.
Would, but never would dump it in a particular yard, yeah.
I like my yard.
We try to be cognizant of where we dump that water. Good question.
Yeah, I'd like to share one other issue, what sold me, because you asked that question. It's been, I don't know how many of you have natural gas. I don't know, I'm sorry about that, but about 10, 12 years ago, or, I moved into my place 20 years ago, and I was hooked up with propane. And had the smaller tank. I thought, I'm tired of this. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna buy this big tank, so I could have this tank. So I did that. About a year and a half later, all of a sudden I get to knock at the door and say, we're gonna bring natural gas in. Do you want it? Well, I just put in this new tank. But I did. I went and I had natural gas hooked up, and do you think I'm happy about that today? Yes, I am. I lost money on that tank, but I know it's a little smaller scale, but so I understand where some of you could just put in a new system and are wondering, why do I have to do something now? So.
Any additional questions right now?
Do you work in the fall? I mean.
Actually, that's one of the reasons.
Can you do this in October and November?
That's one of the reasons for the survey we'll send out, actually, is asking, residents.
You're screwed, Joe. I'm sorry.
I love.
I know him, so. He's the rock of Lavinia.
No, I,
No, you're there.
I'm there.
Asking residents who is full-time, and then for those that are part-time, when they generally arrive in the spring and when they generally arrive in the fall. Jokingly, of course, we have northern Minnesota. Last year was a very warm year, so we could have extended construction longer, but we don't have that luxury very often. Trying to stay outside of those main windows, if we can, on these two segments in particular, will be a very critical part for us in what we define for the contractor as the windows with which they're able to do that work.
One thing too, I think we should say too, that there's generally the Birchmont Court, that'll be a little bit different too, because we're working with the county. The county's redoing that road, so that's a little bit different. Like, we have our plans, as far as what the township's doing, but I'm assuming that little spike in there.
Oh, you're talking about County 20?
County 20, yes, I'm sorry.
Yep.
That'll be, we have to work with them also, because they're doing bike trails and they're doing a bigger project like County Road 20. That's kind of a different beast, and we're talking with you guys. But that might be a little bit of a different than we say, we're just gonna come down and kind of work our way out. We gotta have to work within that. That might be something we might have to jump out and make sure the contractor might have to be working with them in a different sequence, just to make sure that they can keep moving on that project.
County 20 is being reconstructed. I don't know if everybody here has heard that or not, but full reconstruct, new road, curb and gutter, storm sewer, bike trail separated from the road on the lakeside. As a note there.
And that's one of the things too that we look at when we were talking about this too, like the use and the disturbance to the community. You can't monetize that. We know there's a definite cost savings, but we also know that there's a disturbance to the community, and we would like to keep that to one time, to do this project at one time. And we're very thankful the county had patience with us to work through these things and try to get money, and they have. So very fortunately, like, we can hopefully make that disturbance to those residents one time, and that does affect everybody who drives back on that road also. That's gonna be an issue, and we can make that happen one time and get this project done.
That's one more item that came up there. Chris started off by noting that we've got, township has $6 million in federal grant. Shouldn't be lost that not only has the township acquired $6 million in federal grant, but also just over 1.1 million in state grant for Fairgrounds Road, plus 180, I don't remember the number on Wild Plum. But the amount of grant that's come into your township, and kind of to Carlene's question there about that, they've been really active in trying to bring that in and, you know, they're nearing $8 million in grant in 2 years, into the township to do some of these projects, not only sewer projects, but these road projects as well, which is much more substantial than we're seeing with our other 7 townships that we represent, for instance.
Well, I don't need to keep anybody. You can go enjoy the heat if you'd like to, but if you have anything else, we're sure willing. We're here for a meeting at 5 o'clock. So if you want to stick, you sure can. If you have more questions, if you want privately, that's by all means happy to answer those questions too also. So thank you for coming, everybody. We really appreciate it.
Is Dan related to you or not?
Pardon me?
Is Dan related to you? I graduated here behind Dan.
I'm talking about.
Yep, but maybe. And you would have graduated.